parts to it. And if you want to have fun with this, get this Time magazine article. It was called Beyond He or She. And you can go on the internet and get it. It was a cover story, and it happened about, I'd say it's a year ago now, Beyond He or She, in which they were making the sort of culture-based or anecdotal. We talked to 80 people, they said, and these 80 people don't think there's a he and she anymore, right? So of course it's not science. But get that, because it's really interesting to see how far people go to manipulate this conversation for each of their ideological reasons. And remember, I think their ideological reason is protective. I think they believe if we can get males and females to be the same, then we will no longer have oppression of women. So I really believe the bottom line for these folks is protective. They want to protect women. And they believe that girls and women are harmed when we look at males and females from different lenses. Okay, so they are protective people. They're just wrong. So they're wrong because they're not talking about the thing we're talking about. All right, so there's so you got to be talking about 4 things at once. There's anatomical sex, right? So that's obviously your reproductive organs, the genes that come in on the X and the Y. XX is female, XY is male, Y is the male, okay? And then obviously your anatomy in your body, the amount of iron you process. Males process iron differently than females. Calcium, how your cells are set up, right? Y cells are set up somewhat differently than X cells. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing is sex in the brain. So the X and Y chromosomes hit the system, right? Hit the mom as the mom is carrying the baby and hit the baby. And between around 4 weeks to 6 months in utero, the hormones hit the system and say, okay, wait a minute, this is a male, this is a Y, right? We got to hit that system differently than X. X is going to be female. XX is female, XY is going to be male. So since we got a Y in these cells, that system's got to shift, and the hormones are going to shift it, and it's going to reformat the brain. Okay, so, and that will become more clear, especially in the next 30 minutes, become even more clear how that happens in utero. So when you think about why is it that guys in all cultures, why is it they throw things? And they love to move objects through space. Why does that exist in every culture that we study? Something happened between 4 weeks and 6 months in utero that reformatted the brain so that males are more spatial in the way they approach the world. That's sex on the brain, okay? And then sexual orientation. Obviously, sexual orientation is what they're really talking about when we talk about LGBTQ. And take the T out because I'm going to cover that in a moment, but LGBTQ. What we're talking about there generally is sexual orientation. Not always with the Q, but generally is sexual orientation, lesbian, gay, bisexual. Okay? So that's its own category, and that is handled by a nucleus in the brain, the sexually dimorphic nucleus, and there are genes that are passed down for that. Right? So that's not sex on the brain. That's not anatomical sex. That's a different topic, sexual orientation. And then the fourth is gender fluidity. And that's the concept that we all just pick who we feel like we are that day. If that's what everyone is talking about, then we got to make sure that's what we're talking about. And the argument that I would make is that the systems, especially as relates to guys, and issues boys have in school and boys have in neighborhoods, and the loss of males, the high suicide rate among males, gang violence, social emotional dysfunction, and now a lot of time spent in front of screens, not maturing till 30, 35, if at all. A lot of that grows from a systems failure. We tried to take out male from this, and that's caused us big trouble over the last 25, 30 years. And part of why we've tried to do it is because we were conflating, putting these four together in our culture conversation, and we really should separate these. So there's no doubt that someone can wake up one day and say, you know what? I'm 5 years old, I happen to be male, I've been dressed in blue the last 5 years, I would like to wear pink today, right? How great is that? Like, who cares? Great, wear pink. And guess what? Today I would like to play with dolls, and in fact I'd like to play with dolls for the next month. Great, play with dolls, okay? That's people experimenting with, at even the youngest ages, trying to figure all this out for themselves and expand and diversify their consciousness of who it is to be a human being. That would be under number 4, gender fluidity. And one of the funnest things to do is to look at our own lives and compare what we were thinking when we were 20 or 21, 22, and then what we think after we have kids, right? So we're thinking all sorts of stuff when we're like in college, and then we have children. And especially around things like sex and gender in the brain, you can tell me, what happens by the time you're like 30 or 35 and now you have 2 girls and 2 boys, or 1 boy and 1 girl? What happens? Do you think the same way you thought when you were 20, when you were thinking, I just get to pick who I am? Yes, no? You tell me. You think a little differently, don't you? 35 or 40? Yeah, because by then you've had the kids and you go, oh, wait a minute, there's something going on here. My girls and my boys they're all human. We're, all the same, right? We're all human, but there's something going on. Okay, so that's the context in which I hope we will do number 4. So when you see things like beyond he or she or stuff like that, then we need to say, okay, hold on, which are they talking about? And when we talk about transgender, what we used to call transsexual and it shifted to transgender, what we're talking about is around 0.3% of our population who we now know. And I have this in Saving Our Sons, and then The Minds of Girls will be coming out in January. I have it in The Mind of Girls as well. But if you want it now, you can get it in Saving Our Sons. The research on what's happening in the brain of transsexual, transgender, we now can see that if it's a male to female, that the brain is set up like more of a female brain, but the body has male anatomy, right? That creates a disconnect between the brain and the body. If it's female to male, obviously the other way. The brain is male. There are 7 or 8 centers of the brain that are activated male, but the body is female. It creates a lot of depression. It creates a lot of suicide. It's a very difficult way to live, and these are folks that really need our help, right? So that's in a category where the brain is disconnected from the body. That's around 0.3 or 0.4% of our population, and obviously that's in the news quite a bit, and I believe will be for the next decade, if not forever, because I do believe we're going to be creating more and more folk who create a more diverse landscape. Our genetic systems are shifting slightly, and so I would expect us to have more transgender 10 years from now even than we have now. At the same time, it's an exception that proves the rule. The rule is that male-female brain difference exists, and then there are exceptions to the rule. Okay, so now with that in mind, here's what happens. For folks who don't know, what happens is the X and the Y chromosome get in there, right? Mom and dad create child, conceive. It's going to be XX or XY. Few people are XX, Y, few are YY, XYY, etc. But most folk are XX, XY. The Y chromosome tells the mom system, this is a male. So I've got a male in here. Your system's going to have to shift to make sure to create a male brain to fit this male body. So what happens is a little shot of androgenic goes in from the mom, from the ovaries, shoots in and signals the male child to drop the testes. As the testes are dropping, so this starts around 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks in utero onward, the testes drop, and as they drop, they shoot testosterone through the system. And this is how you get what we call gender differentiated brains, what we used to call sex differentiated brains. So by 6 months in utero, the male and the female brain are formed. Doesn't mean they won't be affected by life, of course they will, but they're structurally formed by 6 months in utero, okay? And that happened primarily because the default human brain is a female brain. That's our theory, right? That everyone is really XX. Until about 4 to 6 weeks in utero, when the Y cells kick in and say, I'm not XX, I'm XY. I need to differentiate. And it takes about 6 months in utero to differentiate. And then by 6 months in utero, males and females are immune to the cross-sex hormone. So remember that females, right, fetal females are getting testosterone. Fetal males are getting estrogen. We're all getting each other. In fact, right now, all the men have estrogen, the women have testosterone. It's called androgenic hormone in women, but it's testosterone, right? So we all have what each other has. But the difference is a difference in degree. So males get 10 to 20 times more testosterone, and it's flooding their system. It floods up, and it not only changes, the whole body, but it changes the brain. So that's what this is about. Chromosome markers are on the X and the Y. Then you've got the in utero development that completes at around 6 months, but and then by 9 months the child comes out, or if it's preemie earlier than that. then nurture, culture, and socialization are going to be part of that. So chromosome markers and the fetal development, that's the lighthouse. That's the nature part that we need to integrate into all our systems. And then comes nurture, socialization, which is great too, and everyone does what they do with that. And as we were remarking a little earlier, for instance, without knowing that males are so testosterone driven, or by saying it doesn't matter, testosterone is poisonous, we don't want it, by doing all that stuff, we didn't scientifically understand, guys. So over a period of 30, 40 years, we reoriented education away from what worked for the male brain and more toward what worked for the female brain. That's a big thing to say, so you have to test me on that, but let's think about it. The male brain on the right is not doing words. The female brain is doing words on the right. Okay? The male brain is doing words on the left, and so is the female brain. So that means the female brain is doing words on both sides. Okay? The male's only doing it on the left. That also means that female brain, so the women in this room, the women who are watching anywhere in the world, remember, this is transcultural. It's transcultural. This comes in on the X and on the Y. So this is why it exists in all cultures. In China, anywhere in Africa, in Europe, in Australia, wherever you are, this exists because it came in on the X and the Y. And my work, as some of you may know, I'm always inserting studies from that are multicultural. So I'm taking studies from Europe, Asia, Australia, South America, etc., because I want to make sure we're always transcultural. We're always dealing with the nature stuff that's the lighthouse. So one of the things that happens in every culture is they can see guys are throwing objects, and they don't talk as much. Or if they talk as much, because a lot of guys like me talk, they don't talk as much about what? What do you think? We all, right? People say this is a stereotype. That's why I have no gender stereotype. People will say, no, you can't say that. If you say that males don't tend to talk about their feelings as much as females, you'll be gender stereotyping, you will ruin the world, you should be put in culture jail, it's really bad. However, wherever you go in the world, you find that that there are males who talk a lot, and again, I'm one of them. And every male presenter you'll hear or you've seen anywhere at home, we talk a lot. But we don't talk as much about feelings and about sensorials. So here's what the research shows. The male brain is not talking as much, it's not connecting the verbal centers, which for males are here, with the sensorial and emotive centers. Okay, that's the key. That's the key. And that's something that's so important for every system we create. Because like a behavior system that we create, like some of you are here from Head Start or from early childhood, and we have talked, all over the country we have talked about this. The assessment in early childhood, right? When you assess and you go in and you see who's being good and who's being bad,